As it turns out, I'm a big old sickly Lyme disease boy. That's me. If guys on steroids are cheating and they can kind of have weak form or, brush by some of the details and give bad advice, I've been playing in hard mode the whole time. So the point would be I've learned a lot over these last 15, almost 20 years. And the things that have worked for me to get me 215 pounds and lean year round, basically, and kind of increasingly so, less lulls in that process, they'll work for you a lot better than they do for me even. So it's really not nearly as difficult as people think that it is. And there's some real particular misunderstandings that I think can help anybody who's trying to take on that journey, which I think is most of us, because I don't think anybody likes this modern world blimp Michelin man Gumby shaped body thing that all of us modern people are going with at the moment, that our default position is just obesity, basically. I mean, isn't it a full-on substantial majority of adults and children at this point in America and probably worldwide now? But yeah, there's just a couple pieces that can really help. The main one is that I never hear anybody talking about muscle groups really only need to be established once. That getting huge and shredded, you see these guys that are in really crazy shape or whatever, that have a physique and a design that you want, and you can see them out there working hard, and you know that when you've really tried to do it, you didn't get much in the way of results, and you were having to push really hard, and you're getting real uncomfortable, and you eventually stop and you bail. I think it really, really helps mentally to understand that that part really only comes once, that it's really only ever a massive challenge to accomplish those things the first time. You really only have to get over that finish line, because ultimately, as it turns out, it is apparently 10 times easier to rebuild muscle than it is to establish it in the first place. From what I've heard, I haven't heard that there's actually a good term for it, because when I've heard the few times I've heard it referred to, they call it muscle memory, right? Because it remembers how big it was or how to get that big, and so then you give it some stimulus, and within a week, 2 weeks, you could have shrunk almost all the way down, and you can get right back just about to your peak. It's awesome. I mean, how cool is that, and how is nobody talking about that? But really, this is just an investment you need to make at some point in your life to get to a baseline that you're happy and comfortable with, and then forever, for the rest of your life, your body remembers and maintains that. And no matter, even if you go all the way back to where you were at, or you get to where you're overweight, or even just let some of the muscle atrophy and whatnot, it genuinely takes, and it's shocked me each time that it's happened for me, it genuinely takes about 2 weeks. I'd say it's about a weekend that you're like, oh, I don't know, I look about it, you're feeling horrible about yourself, as you're starting, and then about a weekend you're like, I don't know, am I like almost to my peak again? Like, what the hell's going on? And within about 2 weeks or so, you've literally rebuilt all of that stuff that took you a while, at least 3 months, 6 months before, to build. And that part of it, I mean, that by itself is just a cheat code, that it's not nearly as hard to put in the work and really go all out to just get something established that then is going to pay you back for the rest of your life, essentially, of being able to be in shape and be more capable, obviously, with having a body that works better. So I think that's probably my number one point that I like to point out to people is, yeah, it is hard, but only really for the beginning, only really for getting it established. And it's even harder if you're just having misfires and you're trying and then you bail and all that stuff. But if you just knew that all you had to do was just each muscle group, just get that muscle group online, get it to where you like it, and then for the rest of your life you'll be able to pump it back up. I think that's a really huge deal. The other big thing is, if you haven't thought about it too much, if you haven't tried too hard, you might be thinking that if you just cut your calories and just lift some weights, then you'll get to the shape that you want to be in. That wasn't the case for me. Having Lyme disease and whatever other hangups that any of us have and whatnot, I really had so much work to do on my system to clean house and get to where my muscles aren't like seizing when trying to push and get to the next level and do the things that I need to do in the gym. And so that's where then fasting and especially juice feasting, getting all of your calories in a day in with just juice, solid food vacation, you're not putting anything solid in, you're letting stuff that's been building up in your system leave you for a long time, and you'll manage to have injuries that you've had your whole life clear up and all sorts of stuff. It's absolutely incredible. But you do essentially, if your best case scenario, I'd say 30% of people probably, they can just be athletic and they can go be fit and but in that case, you're probably not roaming around trying to find other people's advice and ending up on this video. If you're like the rest of us, you've got some housework to do. You've got to clean things up, and you need to get to a baseline, and you can actually get pretty shredded just from fasting to the point of being as low body fat as you want. You're not going to keep that by the time you go back, but you'll be going through a process that will be allowing your system to empty out and get to where it needs to be, to not be just creating disease nonstop and be making you look like a floppy mess. So, and making it difficult to work out and not feel good to exercise. It never felt good to exercise for my entire life until I did my 30-day and especially then the 60-day juice feast. I had very specific experiences of being able to finally go to the gym and it feel good, get the runner's high from running and be able to just like really enjoy a pump sort of thing that I never got to feel before. My system just was always stressed out from trying to exercise and push limits. So fasting, all that sort of stuff, cleaning house detox is very important and is an integral part. And it also plays into healing yourself and making yourself a lot better, preventing disease, reversing disorders and disease and all of that. So it's a very good investment to make. I mean, it's an absolutely necessary investment to make. It's the only way to put it. But if you need any help with that, I have a juice feast guide free. I linked it down below. Not going to charge you for that or anything, but that should just try and get your foot in the door on that, be able to start understanding how any of that works and be able to get little bits of experience so that then you can go the long haul and do a 30-day, 60-day, whatever, or do water fasting or whatever it is. But that guide should clear some things up for you and give you a stepwise process and make it a little simpler. Beyond that, once you've got a baseline, that you do have to eat clean. There's no way around it. Again, there's exceptions to every rule. There are guys who can get away with eating a bunch of bad stuff, and there's lots of people who think that they can eat all the McDonald's and processed food and whatever they want, and they can exercise it off. And in some ways, they can get away with that in the short term, but in the long term, you can picture how that's working, where you're burning off the fat, which is where your body stores the toxic crap that you're eating. And so then your body has nowhere to store the toxic crap, and you're taking in more of it because you're giving yourself an excuse and you're making it all right, and you look fine and you look good and you feel good in some ways. So therefore, there's no limiter on you just eating whatever you want and doing all that. Exercising it off isn't enough, and you will create disease very quickly within a year, within 3 years, within 5 years, 10 years. You are just guaranteed to be destroying stuff in your body. So you do have to basically learn that, get over the childish part of yourself that doesn't want to let go of candies and cakes and treats and processed meals and thinking that those aren't drugs, because we're in a modern world where a majority of the things that we call food are drugs. They are absolutely toxic to your system, and they are antagonizing your system every time that you put them in, and you eat them at the expense of eating things that instead clean your system and instead fuel you cleanly. And that is a recipe for absolute disaster. And you have to be able to be human and be alive and make compromises and that sort of thing, but you have to understand it in a context of it's an exception and it's a rare thing. And specifically, the best framework to me is it's just drugs. Processed food is a drug. Most people have some drug of choice that they allow and incorporate in their life to let off steam or enjoy a weekend or hang out with friends or whatever it is. But when you are at least acknowledging that it's a drug, then you don't have drugs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then wonder why your health is off, and you're not getting the results that you want. So definitely just shifting that perspective to processed food is a drug, and whole foods are really the only thing that is fueling your system ultimately. The other things just are so low in their nutrient density relative to their calories that you're harming yourself ultimately. And it doesn't matter if you're getting away with it now or whatever, you'll pay the price eventually. Everybody does. So clean eating, you do have to, it's a sad truth to get over, but it's also just a truth. So it's not actually difficult. It's not actually sad. Just when you leave the paradigm that this is food and you should be allowed to eat these things for meals and all that stuff, it's simple. You find whole foods that you can eat, that you do enjoy, that give you the feedback that you want and you are excited to eat, and you do that to the exclusion of the processed foods. And I would even specifically say, like, until you get to a place you want to be, even imagine not touching processed foods, but it's all up to you how fast you want to move and how that works. But yeah, so letting go of processed foods, recontextualizing them as drugs is a huge one. And the last point is just that it's worth it. It is hard in ways. Again, it's more just growing up, kind of, it's hard. It's hard to say that it's hard to go to work or something, but you just go to work. You don't have a choice. And it's kind of the same with just being in shape and having a body that looks like how your brain imagines you should look. And it's really, I really do want to emphasize how much, especially for me, where I feel like crap so much of the time. It's pretty much just where I exist, is just there's always deep pain going on somewhere, and it's always stinging, and something will catch and like get stuck spots, and like it can feel like I'm going backwards in all sorts of ways and I'm struggling or whatever, and then I'll walk by the mirror or whatever and be like, oh God, yeah, and I ate off for the last couple of days, and so it's going to be a problem. And then just walking by the bathroom and just like, oh shit, who's that fitness model guy? Like, oh, that's, and it genuinely, it gives you just a pleasant feedback seeing yourself in the mirror, whereas instead you necessarily get like an opposite effect, that you see yourself in the mirror and you're just weirdly shaped. It doesn't feel good. It not only just feels neutral, but it doesn't feel good. And not only clearing that up get rid of that negative stimulus, but then you do genuinely get a positive stimulus that can raise your spirits pretty much any time for the most part. That it really is encouraging to see something healthy and vital look back at you in the mirror, at least relative to whatever else you could be seeing look back at you in the mirror. And it really ends up being worth it. It's been such a big investment, especially for me, that figuring out this puzzle and managing to push through, which again won't be nearly as hard for everybody else, but it's been way worth it even for me. And so I would say for anybody, like, you're going to be so stoked when, not only when you get to that place for the first time and you're just like mind blown, like it's just weird to see something you like in the mirror, not just doesn't offend you, but you actually like it, excites you, it's interesting, it's cool looking, it makes sense. That when then you run into that without expecting it at times, and it boosts your spirits, that you're just like, hey, things make sense and they look good, and things, vitality is coming out, and it's just a different experience of life. And so yeah, I definitely would encourage anybody that it's worthwhile to figure out. Everybody's busy, everybody has different kinds of hobbies and different things, but being able to just get yourself into a state where you like how you look, I think is actually worth it. And we've had many years now of people having a hard time getting in shape or something, and then deciding that like, oh, it's just this terrible thing to be pursuing and imagining, pursuing beauty and imagining you should be fit or whatever else. And those guys are all cheating and all this other stuff, that it's not really necessarily the case. Establishing the discipline to be powerful and look powerful and feel good, and reversing that from instead looking weird and off and weak, is so worth it. It's something I'm extraordinarily glad. I just knew I had to do it, and it has made sense that I've done it, despite it being an unbelievable investment for me in particular. But yeah, and since it's been such a long, difficult trek for me and whatnot, I've just had to cover all the bases and study all of the things and try all of the things. I've been on every end of every spectrum of every kind of diet that could possibly exist. And because of that, I've put together a system, and I work with people and coach people and work with a group to help people find that for themselves and figure out, amongst the infinitely confusing nutrition information that's all pointing different directions, and different advice for high volume versus low volume weightlifting, and body weight, or going to the gym, or there's just so many people that will tell you opposite directions of things. I've kind of got all of them all juggling around in my mind, and I've tried all of them, and I've worked through all of them, and pretty much found success from all the different directions. And so if you want some help trying to figure out what works for you, what fits your lifestyle, how fast you want to go to get to these goals, just down below I'll have a link and stuff, and let's chat. Just schedule a meeting, and we'll talk about what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll figure out what works for you, and we'll see what to do from there, how to get you to those goals. But just let me know, and I'll be hanging out around here. I'll be making some more stuff soon. But take care, guys. God bless.